What is going on, YouTube people? Neo Cards and Comics here. Today we are going to deep dive some grading numbers. We're going to touch on basically all the grading companies, but the genesis for the data and what we're going to talk about today is kind of what I've been hinting at recently in regards to Beckett. The gem rate data came out for last month, and Beckett had a big year over year drop, and in general have kind of been just ho hum, not really having the best year, just kind of cruising along, doing their thing. They don't really announce anything. Nothing ever really seems to get better. Their pricing is whatever. Their turnaround times are a little bit slower. They're very inconsistent. And this is something I've looked at before with TCG, and I kind of wanted to drill down to a secondary level. Beckett has a handful of niche case uses, and that's essentially what I think they're turning into. And their big differentiator is the black label. And I'm worried, my thought process was, I'm worried that they were relying on the black label for business too much. The concern there is what happens if that hobby premium ever disappears, or people just kind of get bored with one of the big aspects, especially on the sports side, not as much on the TCG side. If people get bored with that style of card and don't start putting a premium on the black label, and people stop sending that stuff in, what does that do to Beckett's grading numbers? Because when we kind of look at this stuff, they have some major outliers in a couple categories, and it revolves around their percentage of business that would be a little concerning to me anyways, if I was a major Beckett supporter, a very pro Beckett or a Beckett employee or whatever. So that's what we're going to kind of dive into today. The tent poles of this are, there are certain TCG categories that they have a spike in percentage of the total pop report each month that's getting graded for them. People are sending certain types of cards to them specifically to chase black labels because they black label at a higher percentage than anything else. And on the sports side, what really kind of got this whole snowball rolling is Topps Now, Bowman U Now, whatever, the Topps Now branding of cards. It's been a long known kind of thing that Topps Now are printed very, very cleanly. They grade exceptionally well. We're going to dive into the data for all the companies. It's insane. That also means they black label at a higher clip than most other cards. And it also means a lot of Beckett's business is built on the back of Topps Now, which seems a little concerning. Let's start off looking at some pricing. And this is not perfect. I pulled one example that has a high print run and a decent number of sales across the entire category. Caitlin Clark's Bowman U, the 3,000 point card, had a print run of almost 50,000. It's like 47-ish thousand. Here's some sales data. All these have sold within the last month, give or take. I don't think this card shifted value much over the last 30 days, but this just shows a very nice representation of the pricing breakdowns. Now, if you look at one of the less demand cards, this stuff is going to be way cheaper, but I thought this was a pretty decent one to roll with. The black label goes for around $150 in a BGS 10 black label. The pristine 10 Beckett goes for $69 to be precise. A PSA 10 goes for basically $60. Just little asterisks here. That surprised me how close the gap was on the pristine 10 versus the PSA 10. And this is what you kind of see because they have the black label, and because the black labels are so prevalent in Topps now, it waters down the pristine 10 and basically turns it into a PSA 10. Below that, we have the BGS 9.5 at $44. We have the SGC 10 at $26. Ouch. Not a great look. And a PSA 9 at $23. And this card raw, I don't know what they go for raw now. Obviously on release, they went for like $10 a card or whatever they were. So really what this is kind of boiled down to, and it's been like this for a while, a BGS 9.5 is like a PSA 9.5. PSA doesn't have half grades, but the hobby has basically treated BGS 9.5s. You know, obviously subgrades will swing it a little bit, but generally speaking, even a BGS 9.5 with strong subgrades isn't going to come anywhere close to a PSA 10, especially in a card like this. And I do want to, you got to look through it through the lens of Topps now, not a pack pulled card. So it is going to skew this stuff a little bit. But still, that's some scary stuff on the premiums or lack thereof that some of the companies are getting on this stuff. But it goes to show you why you would also want to chase a black label. Beckett's cheapest pricing tier right now is $18 or $15 with no subgrades, because remember with Beckett you could send with no subgrades, and if it gets a black label they're auto bump it up. So you're looking at between $15 to $18, 45 business day turnaround time. And you all can correct me in the comments down below. It sounds like their turnaround times are all over the place. I perused through the blowout forum and they were all over the place on their return times. So let's just call it that you went with the subgrade option, that you spent $18 a card to grade it. If you can snag a black label, that's a pretty nice turnaround. If you could snag a BGS 10 pristine, you're doing still pretty well given, $18 to grade. Let's call it $10 for the card. You're into it for $30. You're still almost doubling your money up. BGS 9.5, you're essentially covering cost. If you sent the PSA for $16, $17, whatever they're doing, if it tens, you're basically doubling up your money after selling fees. So not bad, but you don't have the chase of the black label. Now, you might be saying, well, black labels are impossible. You're an idiot for chasing black labels. I would agree with you on anything pack pulled that's not TCG. More on TCG in a minute. But for sports cards, for Topps Now specifically, that is not the case. Topps Now actually does gem/pristine at a pretty decent clip compared to most pack pulled stuff. It's funny when you look at over on GemRate, and shout out to GemRate, amazing job helping me put together basically he put together the data. I asked the questions and he put everything together for me. Over at GemRate's actual website, this is a report you can run on yourself that he pointed me in the direction of. This is all BGS black, the highest pop BGS black labels of all time across all cards that they've ever graded. So this is sorted in order, and you can see the categories. A ton of TCG stuff. The first sports card that we get to, Topps Now, Ohtani. As we scroll down this list, all TCG, and you're seeing a mix of a lot of One Pieces up here, and mostly Pokemon, but One Piece definitely sneaks in here quite a bit. The other one that's really high is this JUCO World Series Bryce Harper card. I don't know what I have no memory of that card at all. We see a bunch more One Piece. So what do we see next? Topps Now offseason. That's the Ohtani signing with the Dodgers. More TCG. Another Topps Now Ohtani. A bunch more One Piece and Pokemon. Topps Now Victor Wembanyama. Topps Now Paul Skeens. And this number here is the population count. So these are in the 90s to close to 100 at this stage of the game. Keep scrolling down. Look at all that TCG. A lot of the Pokemon is Japanese Pokemon. There's some more Topps Now Baseball, a bunch more TCG, some more Topps Now Baseball. We got our first hockey card. I think there's a random golf card mixed in here at some point in time as well. But you can kind of get a feel for the stuff that is popping towards the top of this list. Tons of TCG. Like I said, there's that one golf card, 91 Upper Deck. Tiger Woods, which I've seen that one in Black Label. That one pops up fairly frequently, so I'm not surprised by that one. But tons of Pokemon, Japanese specifically, tons of One Piece, tons of Topps now. So those are the pricing spreads, just to give you some idea there. Let's look at the TCG data really quickly. This is a report that I had GemRate put together for me back in the spring. And we at that point in time, we did it for the first quarter of 2024, looking at how the TCG grading data broke down. This time, we ran it for the full year. So this is from January 1, 2024, up until the end of October. What this shows is the buckets of the TCG category. The original hypothesis for this, or question for this was, what does the TCG number really break up into when you kind of dig into it a little bit? So you can kind of see here the individual categories. Obviously, Pokemon is massive at 3.45 million year to date with PSA. And down here, this is what I want to focus on, the percentages. So this is the percentage of, because obviously PSA is going to grade massive amounts more than anybody else if you're just looking at raw numbers. What I'm curious about is the percentage of the business makeup. Of the TCG category, 77% of PSA's business is Pikachus and Charizards. 4% Yu-Gi-Oh!, 4% other, 10% One Piece. I don't know crap about One Piece, but people love to grade that stuff. And it sells for insane prices. And then 2%. If we go over to SGC, theirs looks very similar. 87% Pokemon, and then about 2 to 3% for everything else. They don't really get a bunch of One Piece like PSA does. Otherwise, it looks very similar. CGCs, also very close. 75% Pokemon, 2% everything else. The other category gets a little bit of a larger jump up there. They do not get as much One Piece. Very similar to SGC. So across those three grading companies, they look very similar to each other. A large 3/4 plus are Pokemon, and then it's kind of divided out between everything else. When you come over to Beckett, and just as a reminder, here's PSAs. When you come over to Beckett's, looks completely different. Only 44% of their TCG business is Pikachu and Charizards. 27% One Piece. Now, it's not a huge overall number. It's 76,000 cards, which isn't nothing. That's still a decent chunk of the business. But when you look at like what PSA is doing, once again with 10% and the other two grading companies at 2% and 2%, basically Beckett's getting a, let's call it 20 to 25% bump because of the Black Label chase with One Piece. The other outlier that they have, it's not just one, they have two, is Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball Z TCG, which I have also heard grades really, really well. That makes up 10% of their TCG business. The thing that I would be curious about, and I don't know if GemRate could break this down like this or not, I would be willing to bet that this Pokemon 44% number, a bulk of it is Japanese Pokemon, not US-based Pokemon. I don't know what the split would be, but I bet you it would be I bet you their percentage of Japanese Pokemon business is higher than all the other companies. I would not be surprised by that. And once again, it shows this reliance on the Black Label. Now, is that good or bad? I don't know. I leave that up for you to decide. I'm just basically showing you boys and girls the numbers. And this is pretty nerdy stuff. Don't get me wrong. But the inside baseball grading data kind of fascinates me a little bit. Like what companies kind of do better at different categories than others, like specific product wise. When you come up here, you can see PSA looking at Dragon Ball, 84% gem rate on Dragon Ball, 92% gem rate on One Piece. That tells you how easy that stuff is to grade, how clean that stuff comes off the printer. When you look at Beckett's numbers, Dragon Ball 9.5s at a 32%, it pristine 10s at a 45% rate, and a 10% black label rate. One Piece is an 11% black label rate. If you submit a One Piece card, you have a better chance at getting a pristine 10 or a black label than a BGS 9.5. That's why that business is going there. Because a PSA 10 is a PSA 10 is a PSA 10. With Beckett, you have the chance of having something that's a little bit different, something that is harder to hit, that sets you apart. Artificial scarcity, whatever you want to call it, but that extra level of chase is there. The problem is it does not work for every single card. Most sports cards do not black label because they're pack pulled and they come out looking like crap, at least from a black label standpoint. TCG, a little bit of a different story. Tops Now, never enter a pack. They come straight off the line, right into a little plastic case. Very clean, very well printed cards. Speaking of Tops Now, let's switch over and look at that data, because this is the one to me that was really, really wild. This is all a ton of grading data. What I want to focus on is the Tops Now of it all. This section right here shows the various gem rates. There's couple fun numbers in this little subset of data. This is the gem rate percentages for Tops Now and Bowman U Now at all four major grading companies. PSA gems Tops Now, and when I say Tops Now, assuming I'm talking about Tops and Bowman Now, so the Caitlin Clark stuff. PSA gems it at 83%. Beckett gems it at 92%. Now that's all three of their grades. It 9.5s at 41%. It pristines at 38%. So you have a 50-50 shot at getting a pristine 10 or a BGS 9.5. It black labels at 14% of the time. A Tops Now card black labels. The other thing that this should be telling you is I don't know that I would put as much premium on black labels for Tops Now product. They're actually not that hard to get. 15% of the time is not that crazy. That's almost 2 per 10 card order. Here's the funny one. SGC gems it at 71%. Well, they have a gold label. If Beckett has a 14% black label rate, SGC must have a really high gold label rate, right? Right? No. 0%. The number is so small it doesn't even round up to a full percentage point. Beckett has graded in the year of 2024. This was the most, there's two wild numbers. This to me is one of the most wild. Beckett has gemmed 15, almost just over 14,000 Tops Now cards. So they have gemmed over 14,000 Tops Now cards. 4,800 of those are black labels. SGC is gemmed 17,005, if you rounding down slightly. So very similar numbers of total gem cards. There are 42 SGC gold labels compared to almost 5,000 black labels. Peter, loosen up on the gold labels, buddy. What are you doing down there? And this has been a myth for a while that gold labels are basically non-existent anymore. They're nearly impossible to hit, or the standards are so high that it's just not even a practical grade. I really don't know why they have it around anymore, because it's clear they're not using it. If you're not going to gold label a decent percentage of Tops Now, then why even have the gold label? Either that or Beckett is real fast and loose with the black label on Tops Now, which If you want to get into the drawer and get the tinfoil out, if Topps Now stuff is generating a ton of business for you because of the black labels, would you tell the team, hey guys, it's okay to black label Topps Now at a little higher percentage if it's going to get more through the door? We'll talk about that in a second. In fact, let's transition to that. Oh, we'll talk about CGC really quickly, just to be fair. CGC Pristine's at a 25% rate, 50% gem rate on a 10 gem mint, and then they have a pristine grade. Those come in at 25% of the time. They are not getting very many of these cards, only 2,000 gems so far. Percentage of business. Back to the TCG thing that we talked about, but this time for Topps Now. PSA in 2024, across the board, 2% of the business. SGC, 2% of the business. CSG, 2% of the business. Beckett, almost 10% of all their sports cards graded in 2024 are Topps Now. That might sound like not a ton, but let's look at the breakdown. As the year has gone on, this has taken a major shift, and the last couple months are absolutely crazy when you look at the month by month. And obviously this is going to be affected a little bit by print run, but remember, it's not like Beckett's overall sports numbers have been going to the moon regardless. So you can kind of hypothesize that the non-Topps Now cards getting sent to them is getting lesser and lesser, actually. And it's just they're staying even on this Topps Now and the little bit of TCG business that they're getting with people chasing black labels. In January, it made up 8% of their sports card business that month. February, 7%, March, 6%, April, 1%, May, 17%. June, 11%. July, 11%. August, 15%. Now's where it gets crazy. September and October, it was 23% of their sports grading business. So a quarter, if you want to round up a little bit, a quarter of all the sports cards that they graded in the month were Topps Now. That, to me, is a little scary. That they are relying on Topps Now that heavily for the sports side of the business. And you can kind of see the trends there as it's gone. It's only 10% for the year, but the last couple of months, it has really gone up. Now, maybe this is just noise because there's been some huge Topps Now releases lately. There was some crazy Ohtani ones. There was the Olympic 101 or the triple Olympic one. There were some other big Topps Now chases throughout the end of the year that had huge print run numbers. Jaden Daniels had the one. All that stuff has happened in the last few months. So that could honestly be some of it. But the scary part is, do they have, I guess the real question to all of this is, do they have normal sports card business to replace that 25%? If Topps wasn't releasing a bunch of really popular Topps Now cards the last 3 months, would Beckett be down even more? Are they getting artificially propped up because of the Topps Now business, or do they have cards to replace them? They're pretty consistently inconsistent on their turnaround times, if that makes sense. Like, they're not backlogged for months and months and months and months on end. It's not PSA and SGC during the COVID times when it was an absolute nightmare. It's nowhere near like that. They're not humming along either. So I guess you could say maybe they have a little bit of business build up to sustain themselves. But that just seems like to me anyway, when I heard that number, that really threw some alarm bells up in my mind. Maybe it's nothing. But the fact that they are relying, the last 3 months, 23%, 23%, 15%. And even prior to that, 10, 10, and 17. Basically, since May, they have been relying a lot on Topps Now for their monthly numbers. Now, I don't think that's going anywhere. Topps is all in on Topps Now. So maybe this is all okay. But to me, it just shows maybe not the healthiest overall business model if you're relying that heavily on Topps Now and the black label. Because we saw it on the TCG side, the chase for the black label is real. And obviously here as well, that's why people are sending it, is to try to get the black label. But as part of that, they're devaluing the pristine 10 a lot. Separate video, but maybe I'll go in and look and try to find some pristine 10 sales data on some non-instant cards and see how they do versus PSA 10s. I'm assuming they're going to perform a little bit better. But that's just part of the problem, at least the Beckett's modern problem, with their grades get diluted down because they have grades higher. Yes, black labels are awesome. But because that exists, it artificially hurts the pristine 10. And with the rise of PSA, it's basically turned a pristine 10 into a little bit of a better version of a PSA 10. Now, it didn't used to be the case. The gap used to be a lot wider. It's not there anymore. And it really hurts the BGS 9.5s. That's why when they were going through all their grading scale stuff, I wanted them to keep the black label and just combined make all BGS 9.5s 10s and still label pristines as pristine and label everything else gem mint, but at least it has a 10 grade in the corner. So then you don't have as much nonsense. Like, it's still a BGS 10. It's just there's a difference between a pristine and a gem mint. And in all reality, you could even look at taking the pristine off the label and just making them all gem mint. Yeah, a lot of pristine holders would probably be pissed about that, but I think you're hurting your overall brand because you're watering down the 9.5 so much. And that's your primary grade. Most cards, especially pack pulled stuff, still ended up in that 9.5 slab, and they're getting valued slightly better than a PSA 9, which is rough. So, very curious for your thoughts and comments down below. If you want to take a harder look at any of this data, you could feel free to pause the screen and look at the various breakdowns of it. Once again, shout out to GemRate for putting this stuff together. I spit him the ideas and the questions. We go back and forth, and then he starts running with stuff. Tremendous help. And it gives us, and this is why someone like, or an entity like GemRate existing is extremely important, because it gives us this look under the hood, if you know where to look at this stuff, that takes us a deeper level to kind of understand what is going on at these various grading companies. And I think that is extremely valuable. And I think it also helps keep the grading companies a little bit more honest to a degree. So that is all I got. Very curious for your thoughts and comments down below. Does this concern you at all? Does the fact that 25% of their sports business is coming from Topps Now, is that a red flag? Did you go, holy smokes, like I did when you heard that number? Or are you like, makes sense, not a big deal? You're overthinking this one. Is that what I'm doing? Or is this actually, Danger Will Robinson? Let me know in the comments down below. Catch you boys and girls on the next one. Peace.